And so our first teaching and you know, this way of life, this program we call Joven Noble, is making sure that the young people understand that first of all, you're sacred, just the way you are, just like you are, with your wounds, with your blessings. You're sacred just like that, you know. And if your mama, your daddy, or your grandparents, if they had a tough time, you know, sharing with you that, or blessing you, or loving you, it wasn't because they didn't want to. It's because they were wounded. And what wounds do is it freezes you. You know, we call it susto. You know, it kind of, you're so afraid that you just get frozen. And many of our you know, our parents and our grandparents, you know, they had, you know, more direct wounds. They were enslaved. They were hung. They were tortured, and they were pulled away from their family. And even today, you know, we're taking, you know, mamas and daddies and deporting them, taking them away from their children, you know, for whatever reason, and don't really understand the impact of that, you know, and if they're not deporting them, we're locking them up. You know, if they're not locking them up, they're making parents feel like you don't know how to raise your kids. And when you tell somebody you don't know, and you're not valuable, you're not smart enough, you don't speak the right language, and you don't have the right degrees, you know, that freezes you again, you know. And so what we're really dedicated to do is honoring, you know, the sacredness of people. The second teaching is really reinforcing that every young person has a sacred purpose. Everyone, God, you know, Creator don't make no junk. He doesn't make, you know, doesn't make dysfunction. Every way that they come like that, you know. And we see young people with tatted all up, front nub, bald head, think they're all hard. They're sacred too. They're just as sacred as those A students, you know. They're just as sacred, you know. But see, sometimes you got to take away layers, you know, layers of colonization, layers of misinformation, layers of misdirected fear that you know, people from schools or probation or society has put on these young people, you know. And they lock them up, and when they lock them up, you know, the toxicity gets worse. You know, and so when they come out, we got to bless them up. We got to hug them up. We got to welcome them again. We got to remind them, you know. So we play those drums and sing those songs, and you know, because it's a genetic memory in our traditions. There's a genetic memory, and burning that sage, it's ancient. It's further back than the wounds, you know. You play those medicine songs, ooh, that gets into a genetic memory, kind of balances you out again, gets you out of your head, gets you into that ancient ancestor spirit, you know, and you know, and when we get in circle, you know, together, you know, sometimes we're in a place where we're so hurt, we're so stuck that we don't know how to love ourselves. So when you get in circle like that, you get in those medicine circles, teaching, talking circles, the medicine of that circle, the love of that circle then penetrates you to love you until you can love yourself again, to embrace you till you can embrace yourself again, to guide you until you can guide yourself again, to lead you till you can lead yourself again, you know. And that's what, you know, that's our way. There's a word in our Nahuatl language called Encloque Nahuaque. It means an interconnected sacredness, right? And that's a fundamental teaching of relationship, that we're all connected, you know. And that second teaching from the Mayan culture of Enlaquech, tú eres mi otro yo, you are my other me. You know, so when you're hurting, I'm hurting too. But when you heal, I heal too.
Well, I call it drawing out their own beauty and their own intelligence that they already have. Somebody did that with me, and I do it from my own experience. What happened with me? How was I a heroin user, and I shot people, I stabbed people, I was arrested for attempted murder. At 16, I was in a murderer's row. I was in all this great trouble, but yet somehow I was able to go from trauma to transformation, and the arts were in there. So using my own experience, I thought, well, how am I going to help these kids? So for 35 years, I've been going to prisons and juvenile halls. For 40 years, I've been working with gang youth, trying to change their life. And I've incorporated the arts because I found that the arts are powerful. They're healing. They're also help somebody can tell their story in the different ways their stories can be told through all the arts. It's important that they get validated. It's how they have an initiatory experience in this world without getting shot or killed for it, you know. To me, the arts are a vital part of humanity, because I don't think you're fully human until you're a full artist. There's something about being an artist that really taps into all your humanity. So it's like my friend, I have a great friend, Michael Mead, says, if you don't draw out the beauty in our youth, sometimes that beauty, that what they carry inside them becomes violent. And I think the way to deal with violence and suicide and drug addictions is to get them to be more expressive with words, with painting, with song, with theater, with all these things, to just be out there and creative and feel that they can shape the world with their own hands. That gives them a power that allows them to think of the world as a place that they do have power.
Transformation. I've witnessed, through writing, I've seen young people go from being completely immersed in the gang life, completely projecting their wounds out onto the people around them, and predatory behavior, turning that into something radically creative and healing. I've seen predators, to be really honest, become sources of healing in their communities, and visionaries. And I've seen a lot of, the other piece about this storytelling is that these poems that our young people write kind of reweave the community. We live in a culture that is very individualistic, and when we hear each other's stories, they connect us to each other, and particularly stories that touch on one's wounds. And we operate here at Street Poets with an understanding that our gifts as human beings, the gifts that we were, with a capital G, that we were brought to bring into this world, the medicine we were meant to share with others and with ourselves, and for our own healing and others' healing, is within us, right beside our wounds. And so if you're not willing to feel some of the pain of those wounds, it's very difficult to bring the gifts fully into the world. And so that's an important piece of our work and methodology, is to try to create the space where people can approach their wounds. And writing is a really good way to approach your wounds, because you can do it at your own pace, and you can choose whether or not you want to share it or not, or who you want to share it with. So there's a kind of controlled nature to it that is really important, I think, for young people who are especially just beginning to speak about things they may have witnessed or experienced, or may have happened to them, that might be really delicate and hard to just suddenly speak out loud to somebody. The paper doesn't judge you, the pen doesn't talk back. It's just a safe space, and that's how we make the invitation when we give a young person a notebook. Is like, this is for you, and you decide what you want to share with us, but this notebook is yours to write in. So.
Our approach to when something is happening and there's pain and wounds, how oftentimes people will say, well, what's wrong with you? What caused you to create that hurt or an injustice? And it's not about what's wrong with you, it's about what happened to you, to make you think that way. What happened to you to think that it's okay to disrespect other people? So what's important is to be able to acknowledge that sometimes there's pain and there's hurt, and that there's a process that needs to occur, that it's not a quick fix, that the work that we do is not a Band-Aid approach, it's something that's long-term, and it's something that needs to be continuous, and that we need to be able to create those spaces for folks to heal.
Well, I think a key thing is you want people to, you can't be a stranger to your own wound. Because if you're a stranger to your own wound, then you're going to despise the wounded. And you see that all the time, I mean, all I have to do is watch Fox News, and it's not bad people, it's people who are strangers to their own wound. So consequently, they despise the poor and whoever, they despise the moocher class, or however they strike this high moral distance between us and them. It just means they're strangers to their own wound. I can remember once in this office with homies talking about a trainee, and one homie right out of prison, long time in prison, but kind of a stranger to his wound, was talking about this trainee. He goes, you know what his problem is? He thinks his shit don't stink. And then Fabian, who you know, says, no, he only smells stink. With two different approaches. But the reason Fabian's approach was so different was Fabian never lets his wound out of his sight. He's close to his wound. He holds it right there. It's his friend. And because he welcomes his own wound, he'll never disparage the brokenness in the other. And so he could see that this guy is not thinking his shit don't stink. He's just, what's permeated the way of living is this kind of pervasive stink. And suddenly it was a very compassionate response to somebody who, this other guy just thought he was arrogant and full of himself. No, not at all. That's wound you're watching there. And because Fabian is so close to it, and it's his friend, he can receive and understand the language that this one trainee was speaking, which was acting out and you know, coloring outside the lines, which happens around here.
I predominantly work with youth and young adults, and I guess I would like to frame as decolonizing the mind. Getting young people and young adults reconnected to their history, their culture, and most importantly themselves. Finding different ways of developing their character and understanding the principles that build that character. So that journey to decolonize the mind is essentially kind of what I do. It's what I have done to work on myself, and just have been a mentor and a friend and a colleague to, you know, a lot of adults and a lot of young people. Probably almost a little over 20 years here in LA. But in a nutshell, decolonizing the mind programming, whatever that encompasses.
Why is it important to decolonize the mind?
I think in a nutshell, I mean, if we look at decolonizing, the root word is Colon. So Christopher Columbus's real name was Cristobal Colon. And so that's where colonization came from. So to decolonize, in my understanding really, is to go from a colonized mindset of I, which is ego-based, back to a rooted indigenous tradition. And when I say indigenous, I mean people that are connected to their land. And that doesn't matter if it's the Americas, Africa, Asia, Europe, being reconnected to the earth and understanding that it's not me, it's we. And so to decolonize really to me means us getting back to our culture, our heritage, and again, most importantly, this we concept, which really becomes, you know, the Inla philosophy of the Mayan. In Zimbabwe, Africa, the Shona, who are the indigenous people of Zimbabwe, what I had learned some 15 years ago is that their language has 360 some dialects to their language. And there isn't one concept for I. The concepts of everything they speak about is in the we concept. And so when I found that out, I found it fascinating, and then I started finding that in other indigenous languages. This concept of nosotros, this concept of we. So when we talk about decolonizing the mind, I think it's the process of deconstructing what all of us are dealing with. When we look at climate change, when we look at global warming, that is the byproduct, which filmmaker Heather Rae has talked about, saying this is the byproduct of slavery and genocide. When we see what's happening at Standing Rock, when we see the poisons of water in Michigan, when we see all the issues that are happening, there was a starting point. And that starting point happened with the colonial period. Because once we got it settled here in the Americas, we went off to other countries and created imperialism. So to decolonize the mind is to go down that rabbit hole, that journey, to deconstruct these layers, most importantly, so we can heal. So we can heal. And I believe in that process, since it's something that I've been utilizing, I've been shared with from my elders and my mentors, to go down this process to heal myself, understanding the decolonial mindset and the phrase decolonizing the mind has kind of led me to a journey to heal myself, getting reconnected to my ancestral roots. And that to me is decolonizing. That to me is essentially the medicine to assist young people, especially young people and adults of color who have been disconnected because of the colonial system that we live under.
We still live in a society where we're teaching young men that they shouldn't cry. They need to hold everything in. I mean, it's still happening today, even as we're having this conversation. And again, see, those are not little things. Those are big messages that are being sent. So we have to create a circle at a young age, and we know we've done it with elementary school, where we slowly start talking about some of those things. Who is it in your life that told you that men shouldn't cry? We talk about, oh, it was my tío, oh, it was my mom, and y por qué te dijo eso? Why did she tell you that? And then have them critically think, well, what happens to somebody who's in pain and holds it all in and doesn't cry? What happens to them? It's not for me to tell them. It's for them to figure it out, right? The key to working with young people is to never tell them anything. Is to always help them figure it out. Because me and you are the same. When we figure it out, if someone's guiding us, it's like, oh, that light bulb turns on. But if I tell you, or your wife tells you, or your homie tells you, like, you're a little bit more reluctant to learn, ¿verdad? Pero si puedes crear una situación, if you could create a situation where you're constantly asking them critical questions for them to think about, and they come to that realization on their own, that's the real power. That's the power, period, is creating that. So, I could tell you hundreds of examples of how that works and how that functions. So like I was saying, so what happens to a young man when he doesn't cry? They know the answer. You walk them through that, and they'll tell you, oh, they're holding it in. So what happens to a young man that holds in his anger and his rage? Well, they're not really holding it in, teacher, because eventually it's going to come out somewhere else. Oh, really? And where does it come out in? Then they start telling you where it comes out. Well, they hit their girlfriends. Oh, they do drugs. Or they get mad at the teacher. Oh, so those are some of the symptoms of holding stuff in, right? See, it's not me telling them. I facilitated a dialogue for them to critically look inside themselves, right? Every young man knows everything he needs to know, right? It's our job to help facilitate that to come out, They know why they're in pain. They may not be able to articulate it. They don't know how to articulate the pain, but they know why they're in pain. So our job is to help them to bring it out without us telling them. I could look at a young man, and usually most of the time, man, I'm like, oh, that brother doesn't have a father at home. He's being raised by the streets, right? He's angry because he never had a dad in his house. But that's not my job to tell him, hey, bro, I know why you're angry. I know why you're cussing at the teacher. That's not my job. It's not going to do any good. My job is to help him, because when you help guide them, then the heart starts to open up, and the heart's like, now the mind and the heart working together, where the mind has come to that self-realization. Oh man, I have all this rage about my father, and this is the first time I talk about it. And then it starts sending the message to the heart, hey, this guy's saying it's okay for me to cry about it. No one's ever told me it's okay for me to cry about it. And now I know if I don't cry about it, these are the things that are going to happen. So, and I'll be honest with you, Luis, this is years of work that I finally started to realize that I can't tell students anything. I have to be intelligent enough to create a space for them to self-reflect. Not me telling them. It doesn't work. It's all about self-reflection. And how do I do that as a maestro? How do I do that as a teacher? How do I become that, like that the obsidian, that Tezcatlipoca, where I'm just holding up the obsidian, right? And they're seeing themselves inside that obsidian, and they're reflecting. So anyway, I don't know if I answered the question.